presentation and for the work that you've done in the last year. Now, to confuse those numerically challenged, we're going to go to item 9. This is a review of the representation arrangements. It's a culmination of a lot of work. There is a lot of appendices, attachments 9A, 9B, 9C, 9D. I'm led to believe that if you look at 9C, you'll get something, no, 9D rather, you'll get the report and recommendations. I'd like to, before we get too far into this, thank Councillor Ferry, who has led the Joint Governance Working Party on a lot of meetings and a very full process. I'll ask Councillor Ferry to lead this and thank her for, I've sat through quite a lot of those meetings and I don't know how you endured them all, but you did. And I welcome to the table Warwick.
Yes.
Who's also endured those meetings.
Kia ora, so just a few comments to start, if that's okay. So I want to acknowledge it's been a huge piece of work to get to this point. And we've had amazing staff supporting the 13-member working party, which has included both local board and governing body members, as well as Chair Taipiri from Haukura. What's before you today is the result of early engagement. People may have forgotten that this happened earlier in the year. It feels like a long time ago, back in February, with advisory panels, mana whenua, mata awaka, local boards, key stakeholders, staff, people's panel. And that shaped the initial proposal, which went out then through July and August through a special consultative procedure. And you can see on page 29 the list of engagements undertaken as a result for that special consultative procedure, which then attracted over 2,300 written submissions, which is not too bad. We then held hearings late August and earlier this month and heard in person from 21 of those submitters and also from 8 local boards who asked to speak to their resolutions. We had 19 out of 21 make resolutions, with 8 sought to speak directly to the hearing process. It was quite interesting because we don't usually have formal hearing processes like that outside of like bylaws and regulatory stuff. So it was quite interesting the level of formality that was required, but trying to keep the tone constructive and not too intimidating for submitters. So thank you to the Working Party members for creating an atmosphere where we could have some good conversations. We seriously considered those submissions, and that resulted in some minor but important changes to the final recommendations that you have before you today, particularly in regard to where to draw the subdivision boundary lines for Rodney Local Board, and also the tricky issue of where Newmarket and Parnell belong in terms of council wards. Those are the 2 particular changes that came out of the submission process. We also identified a number of issues that need future work but could not be addressed in this representation review, sometimes because of the limited scope of a representation review and other times because we sort of need to see how things in those areas develop. So, for example, the rapid changes in Drury. And so before I hand over to Warwick, I'd just like to acknowledge all of the staff. I started making a list and I think I've probably forgotten some people, so I'm a bit nervous about it. So what I might do, if it's all right with you, Mr. Chair, is I'll leave that comment for when we actually move the item, the final thing, and that way I can check my list. But I can acknowledge all the Working Party members now. So Chair Taipiri for Haukura, for governing body, councillors Henderson, Leone, Watson, Newman and Baker. For the local boards, so they have a process where they had a local board member representing a group of local boards, and then they had to go back and forth with that group. So we had Chair Handley for the Islands, who was also Deputy Chair remains Deputy Chair of the Working Party, Chair Full James for Rural, Member Northey for the Central Boards, Chair Gillen for the north, Chair Catchpole for the south, and Chair Thomas for the west. So I'll hand over to Warwick now, if that's okay with you, Mr Mayor. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. The discussion today focuses really on what changes from the initial proposal that went out for consultation as a result of submissions. And the purpose of the presentation is just to highlight for you the key things that you need to know for basing your decision making. In terms of where we're at now in the process, we started off with the initial proposal and there was quite a lot of work prior to that done by the Joint Governance Working Party. Had the consultation, had hearings. We're now at the point of resolving the final proposal, that's today. We then publicly notify the final proposal that you agree today and receive objections and appeals. We're required to refer those to the Local Government Commission for final decision, and there's a tentative date set for a hearing on those for the 4th of February next year. In terms of the consultation process, there's quite a lot of detail in the written report about the engagement that was undertaken. As Councillor Ferry has said, there were 2,359 submissions. Local boards resolved formal submissions. The Joint Governance Working Party heard oral submissions and considered all other submissions. And in your attachments, there is the formal report and recommendations of the Joint Governance Working Party. This is just a high-level overview of changes to the initial proposal in terms of the key elements in the initial proposal. So in terms of Central Auckland ward boundaries, in the initial proposal, these were all realigned to local board boundaries. That's amended. The Joint Governance Working Party is recommending that as amended. We'll look at the detail of that soon. In terms of the North Shore ward, there's an issue there where the North Shore ward doesn't comply with that 10% rule. But in the initial proposal, it does align with local board boundaries, and the reason it doesn't comply is that to get it to comply would require detrimental effects in terms of communities of interest. In terms of the Rodney Local Board, the proposal went out with an arrangement that corrects the non-compliance of the current Wellsford subdivision, and it spreads representation more evenly and reflects rural communities. The changes being recommended there, as Councillor Ferry has said, are to do with the naming of subdivisions and a change to the boundary between what was initially the North Rural subdivision and the South Rural subdivision, so that Kaukopakoppa is in the south. For the Howick Local Board, the initial proposal corrected the non-compliance in the Botany subdivision, and it did that in a couple of ways. Firstly, by creating an additional subdivision to represent the Flatbush community and increasing the number of members. The initial proposal also contained provisions for non-compliant local board subdivisions and for minor changes to some local board boundaries. Just to remind you of the legal requirements in terms of decision making, the legislation requires that the council and also the Local Government Commission, when making decisions, takes into account these two things: effective representation of communities of interest, and that can be discussed in terms of what the areas people identify with, what services they share, and which areas need to have political representation on decision-making bodies. There is also a requirement to align ward boundaries with local board boundaries as far as is practicable. The other requirement is called the fair representation requirement, and that's a requirement that when you have electoral areas like wards or subdivisions in a local board, that the population per member doesn't vary from the average per member across the whole area by more than 10%. But the legislation does allow us to decide to not comply if compliance would mean that it would be splitting communities of interest. The legislation also requires that where we do make that decision to not comply is confirmed by the Local Government Commission. So regardless of appeals and objections, these decisions need to go to the Local Government Commission anyway. So in a little bit more detail, ward arrangements. In terms of Central Auckland ward boundaries, the initial proposal, again, proposed that the ward's boundaries in Central Auckland would realign with local board boundaries. The Joint Governance Working Party recommendation there, having heard submissions, some very strong submissions, is recommending that the Parnell and Newmarket areas will remain in the Aoraki ward, St John's will remain in the Mongakiki Tamaki ward. That's a map of current boundaries. That's a map of the final proposal. So by flicking between the two, you can see where the changes are. In terms of North Shore and Albany ward boundaries, there was the need to address the non-compliance of the North Shore ward at minus 13.82% without detrimentally affecting communities of interest. You might recall that when we presented the initial proposal, the Joint Governance Working Party did present an option for achieving compliance, but there's disagreement about the effects on communities of interest. And the initial proposal was that the boundary would run along Sunset Road. That's a ridge and it forms a natural boundary, and that has not changed as a result of submissions. There are other minor changes to the North Shore ward to align it with changes to the local board boundaries, and so if those are the current boundaries, and those are the final proposal boundaries. You can just see those minor changes there. So in terms of wards, these are the final populations. Albany is pretty much on 10%, just over. North Shore is minus 13.7%, and all other wards comply. In terms of local board arrangements, Rodney local board subdivisions, the issue that we had to address was the Wellsford subdivision having a variance of minus 22.63%. The initial proposal suggested 5 subdivisions. It's based on recognising rural communities of interest, and it also spreads representation more evenly around subdivisions. After having received submissions, the Joint Governance Working Party recommends some slight changes to the naming of those subdivisions, and as mentioned before, a change to the boundary between Northern Rodney and Southern Kaipara, so that Kaupakapa is included in Southern Kaipara and all subdivisions comply. I should have mentioned there that there were some submissions that were wanting areas in Waitoki and Wainui to be included also, but if that happened, then we wouldn't have a complying situation. The Joint Governance Working Party, you'll notice in your recommendations, has also made a recommendation in terms of more work to be done on Rodney subdivision names. So that's the current and the final proposal for Rodney Local Board subdivisions. In terms of submissions, we should note that there were quite a few submissions opposing the initial proposal. The percentages here are based on total submissions. If you just take the submissions from the Rodney area, then you find that about 76% oppose. But the key thing here is to look at those that do not support. They're broken down into those who have an issue in terms of Kaupakapa and those from the Warkworth and Wellsford areas. We've addressed the Kaupakapa issue in part. In terms of Warkworth, the key submissions coming from the Warkworth subdivision was to do with the reduction in the number of representatives. As I said, the proposal that we're working on spreads representation around more evenly. Howick Local Board subdivisions, the initial proposal was for Howick to Howick subdivision, 3 members, Pakuranga 3 members, Botany 2 members, and Flatbush 3 members. There's no change. It's a map of the subdivisions. In terms of non-complying local board subdivisions, there were 4 situations in the initial proposal. That hasn't changed. In terms of minor local board boundary changes, there were those proposals there. Most of them are to do with aligning reserve areas with local board boundaries. There's no change suggested there. The final proposal for local board populations is shown on the screen at the moment. I've highlighted the situation of the Howick Local Board. So there are a total of 11 members for Howick. The population per member is 14,000, which does not indicate that the Howick Local Board is overrepresented and compares quite favourably with other local boards where there are fewer people per member. The Joint Governance Working Party has also made recommendations in regard to other matters. In terms of receiving submissions, the Joint Governance Working Party noted that, well, I should say that a number of submissions noted that, including things like people don't really understand how the council works, they don't understand the difference between the governing body and local boards. And also, there were a number of submissions that suggested we look to the future. The legislation requires us to work with current population statistics, but there's no doubt there's going to be significant residential growth into the future, and so there are recommendations there that we look at the effects of that. That's the presentation, Your Worship.
Thank you for the presentation, Warwick. Councillor Sayers has a question. Councillor Sayers?
Thank you, Worship. I just had one question around the Rodney Ward boundaries and the feedback you touched on to do with the Warkworth area, and there were a number of submissions there that indicated they weren't supportive of the original proposal, Warwick. So was there any way, listening to their feedback, was there any way that their concerns were able to be incorporated, or was that not possible?
That's a difficult one to answer, Councillor Sayers. The key concern was the reduction in representation. I don't recall very many submissions actually suggesting that the community of interest that corresponds to the Warkworth subdivision should be other than what was being proposed, except for there were some submissions which said everything's fine, there's no need to change. We do need to change that. There is significant non-compliance with minus 22% for the current Wellsford subdivision.
Okay, Warwick, so thank you for that. So I think what you're saying there, you couldn't keep the status quo, that the submissions from Warkworth didn't suggest an alternative, and that what is being proposed, this modified version, is all compliant.
It's fully compliant, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I think there's no further. Oh no, somebody's. There are no questions, but I'll let Councillor Ferry
I have a
sum it up
question.
and ask a question.
Yeah.
I've got a question.
So the question is just for Warwick to explain in terms of this process of the decision making. Members will recall that we decided that the hearings would be done by the Joint Governance Working Party as opposed to this group, which is the ultimate decision maker.
That's right.
So I wondered if you could just explain it in terms of if people are seeking amendments that make significant changes to the recommendations, what does that mean? The fact that all of us around the table, or some of us have taken part in the full hearings process, have read all the submissions, some may not have. So could you just explain a little bit about what that means and how the Local Government Commission might respond to significant changes from the recommendations? I think that's important for people to understand before decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The legislation requires the Council to consider all submissions and make such amendments as the Council thinks. So the context for the decision making is the submissions that have come in. So if members are interested in proposing amendments to the recommendations of the Joint Governance Working Party, they should have acquainted themselves with all submissions and thinking through the whole process, particularly to the next stage. If you were to make a change now, which people might oppose to the Local Government Commission, the Local Government Commission would want to know, why did you make that change? And so it's important to record any reasons for making a change.
Thank you for that, Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Just quickly, Mayor, thank you so much for all your work. Just a real quick question. Can I confirm the proposal, particularly the Rodney area, whether that has been changed and proposed to focus on communities of interest having rural character?
Yes, that's correct. There has been a lot of discussion, particularly at the Rodney Local Board area. When you're looking at a large rural area like Rodney, it's difficult to say this is rural, that's not rural. We've tended to focus the subdivision areas around what's on our plans as future development areas. But even so, even the proposed Warkworth subdivision is larger than what's shown as a future development area on our maps. But basically, the northern Rodney and the southern Kaipara areas correspond to areas where there is no future urban development proposed, and Kumiu, Dairy Flat and Warkworth correspond to where there is future urban development.
So we've got rural wards essentially in that, within that local board area.
Yes, I mentioned that there's been quite a lot of discussion, and some people will argue that even with the current arrangements, I've heard the argument that the representatives for the current Warkworth subdivision are actually live in rural areas, and it's mixed.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, people even in the townships in rural areas think they're rural. So it's an interesting dynamic to deal with. Councillor Hills, please.
Yeah, two questions. One, just following up from Councillor Henderson, just because of the difference, I guess, in the general subdivisions and rural, do you think we should be having a referendum on those wards? I'm just asking.
And, well, my personal opinion is no. The legislation makes this a responsibility of the council, and if we get it wrong, then people can object to the Local Government Commission.
Okay. And my other question is, and I did send you a question you gave me some based on a proposal from the Devonport Takapuna Local Board. I understand was that there was just one submission of the 2,000 submissions?
There was one submission that suggested extending the North Shore ward even further in order to achieve compliance. The point being made by that submission was to achieve compliance.
And could you just give the brief for, you gave me one pro of the full compliance, but there was 4 cons there, just for transparency, because this popped up during the final part of this process.
Sure. Well, one of the arguments against the suggestion to expand the North Shore up the coast is a community of interest argument. And what I've heard is that the East Coast Bays kind of have a community of interest together. Historically, and this is going back quite some time now to when the Local Government Commission was proposing arrangements for the Auckland Council. It initially proposed that Campbell's Bay be within the North Shore Ward. After it received submissions, it changed that and determined that Campbell's Bay should be in the Albany Ward for community of interest reasons. The feeling I get is that there are community of interest reasons for deciding to keep the North Shore Ward boundary as it is, even though it's not complying. One of the pros for that is that in the initial proposal and keeping it as it is proposed, it aligns with the local board boundary. And in the requirement for effective representation of communities of interest, there's a sub-requirement to align ward boundaries with local board boundaries as far as is practicable.
So that proposed change wasn't consulted on, but also wouldn't align the board and local board boundaries. They would have two different boundaries.
If we followed the suggestions of the Devonport Takapuna local board, the boundaries would get out of alignment.
Thanks very much, sir.
Thank you very much for that. I have no more questions, so thank you. You can retire. Oh, no, hang on. I've got one from Councillor Williamson.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, to Warwick about the Joint Governance Working Party. I think I heard Councillor Ferry say there were local board representatives for the north, for the south, for the west, and for the isthmus, but I missed who was for the east. And I can tell you that the northernmost point in our subdivision, for Councillor Stewart and I, is further north than we are right here in this building. And why we are somehow not considered a part of Auckland or grouped into something called south when we are further north than here makes me worry. Why was there not an eastern advisory group?
So the division of doing local board reps like this is actually something that goes back several terms and was determined by the local board chairs forum, and is used as a mechanism not just for this group. So often local boards are approached for representatives, and when they are approached for 6, this is how they are broken down, and the Howick board falls within South, and that's been the case for some years. Thank you.
I get that's been the history of it, but I just think there is a grave anger in my community that keeps saying, why are we not treated as one of the north, south, east and west points of the compass? We're East Auckland, proud of it, and yet we never seem to get that representation. And now another question I guess it's to you, Mr. Chair. I do wish to make or move an amendment. I guess that will occur after you're finished with questions. Can I just get a ruling on how I can move an amendment?
I'm advised by Sandra with an R that we need to have a mover and a seconder for the amendment before. Sorry?
For the original motion to get it.
Perhaps you should speak to this because this is not my policy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation, and then Councillor Williamson, you can move your amendment.
Right. Well, I'm definitely a mover because I'm it.
It's about getting the substantive motion on the table in the first instance and then the amendment to follow.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Do I put the amendment after the substantive motion is put?
Yes,
Or do
we need a mover and a seconder for the original motion. So Councillor Ferry.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Ferry and Councillor Turner.
Well, I want to get it moving. When you agree and worried, I'll shut up and
Now, Councillor Williamson, you have an amendment?
Yes, I have an amendment. I want to make an amendment to the numbers of on the local board for the Howick local board.
Okay.
I'm sure Councillor Stewart will be the seconder if I need it.
Yep.
Okay, are there any more questions before we move the amendment, which has a seconder in the form of Councillor Stewart? Okay, no further questions, then we're going to move the,
So,
it has been moved rather by councillor Williamson and seconded by councillor Stewart.
can we have that
And the amendment is by way of replacement.
The amendment I want to make is changing every one of the numbers. Where there's a 3, I want to make it a 2, and where there's a 2, I want to make it a 1. In other words, another 11, instead of having 11 local board members, the ward will have 7.
This is referring solely to the
As
Howick.
to the Howick ward,
Howick local.
and I'm happy for there to be the 4 subdivisions as proposed by Warwick, McNaughton and others. I don't have a problem with moving to 1 more subdivision. I think we'll get slaughtered by the public if we bring in more elected members rather than what we've already got. We've got more elected members in this council than the whole country has. And to be saying we're going to have some more, it'll be dynamite at the next election, and I don't want to do that. I want to bring the numbers back. So instead of it being 3, 3, 2, 3, I'd like it to be 2, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah.
That's the amendment.
Okay, I'm just going to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes for a comfort stop and for councillor Williamson to come around and work with Sandra with an R so we get this dead right. And then we will vote on that after when we come back. So 5 minutes, please, if you wish to take a comfort stop. This is now your time. resume your position, thank you. Come on, Councillor Philippina, pop back. Rightio, we now have the amendment up there in red. I'm going to ask Warwick to come back for questions solely about the amendment. That's apparently in the rules. Okay, and I think there will be some questions about this. In fact, Warwick, having considered this, I'd like you to just address us on your initial concerns about this. I know there's all sorts of rules and things to be complied with, but on the other side of things, I do note that we would now have more local board members than there are councillors for all of Northland. So there is sometimes rules produce odd results. So please address us, Warwick, on the implications of this.
Thank you, Your Worship and members. Before you vote on this, you need to be aware that based on current subdivision or the proposed subdivision boundaries, changing the number of members in that fashion would produce non-compliance in the Botany subdivision of 23.65%. To decide to accept non-compliance, there needs to be a community of interest reason. That would be my comment, Your Worship.
Okay, there's a question from Councillor Baker. And hang on, and I'll get you next.
Thanks, Warwick. So a couple of questions. Did we consult on, as part of the initial, did we consult on reducing Howick's total number of board members from 9 to 7? Was that part of the original consultation?
We didn't consult on it, but from memory there were 4 or 5 submissions suggesting it.
And just to clarify, if we increased it to 11, there is no budgetary impact that the payment for those 2 extra board members comes from the pool of money. So basically the local board members would be paid less because it would be divided by 11, not 9. Is that right?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. I checked my understanding on that with the Remuneration Authority yesterday. It might not be correct to say that going to 11 they would experience a decrease because the Remuneration Authority is currently undertaking a review of local government remuneration. But it is true to say that the way they decide, or the methodology they use at the moment for deciding the remuneration of local board members is based on a sizing index for the local board and is not dependent on the total number of members. And so regardless of how many members on a local board, it's the same remuneration total.
Well, that's obviously a definite perhaps. Deputy Mayor Simpson.
Yeah, I'm struggling on this because on one hand, we seem to have a huge amount of elected members in our governance structure, as the mover said, more than central government. On the other hand, you've got a very unbalanced ratio in the local board between local board and community. Can you give me, so it was already over at what figure? 14,000, wasn't it? Everybody else was about 12.
That's correct, 14,000 if it was 11 members.
And if it was 7, it would be what?
22,000.
22,000, one person to 22,000 people. Okay, my next question is, because I was going down the same path as Councillor Baker, we didn't consult on this, but is it legal? I mean, because we didn't consult on it, but because 4 people suggested it, that means that we can actually make a decision on it. This is not illegal. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong words. Is this within the scope of what we should do?
I'm subject to correction from our legal people, but my understanding is that there's no kind of black and white legislative guideline on what change you can or can't make. It's safest to make changes based on submissions that you've received. There were 4 submissions along those lines.
And my last question is there no other way, like boundary change or something? I mean, obviously the Howick local board area is humongous with regards to its population base. Is there no other way of doing this? I mean, the answer for me, if I was trying to get to where I thought was a good place, would be to reduce the boundary, keep the local boards the same and spread the love. Is that not a possible? The population across.
So you're talking about changing the local board boundaries in more than a minor way. It's not possible through a representation review. There's another process called reorganisation, which we did start to look at before, but we were going the other way. So we were looking at wards which had 2 local boards in them and amalgamating those 2 local boards in the ward. What we've got with Howick is 1 ward and 1 local board. And in terms of the numbers we were thinking about when we were looking at reorganisation, which was a maximum of 12 members on an amalgamated local board, 11 on Howick seemed to be consistent.
So you're really telling me we should have 2 local boards?
Well, really, I'm advising that we can't create 2 local boards through this process. We can through a reorganisation process, if that is what you wanted.
Okay, just bear with me, I'm trying to get to a good point here. So if we were to vote for the amendment, what is the next stage to then move to a better place? Because, I mean, the better place of getting a second local board or whatever. I mean, is this a temporary step? I mean, I just don't think that Aucklanders really feel that Auckland elected members need to increase.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many. So you have a minimum, I think, of 5 on a local board. So if you had 2 local boards for that area, you'd have 10 members.
Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. The first is, did we vote on a proposal to include this in the initial proposal, the idea of this amendment?
My recollection is that at the debate, when we decided the initial proposal, Councillor Williamson objected to increasing the number of members on the Howick Local Board. We didn't consider a proposal.
Right, but we had a vote on an amendment at that time which was not successful, so we decided not to put this out to in the initial proposal. Is that correct?
I can't recall whether we actually voted on an amendment, but I do recall the objection.
Okay, thank you. So we have had this debate before. The other question I had was, so you mentioned there that, so we're looking at potentially a 24% over non-compliance for the Botany subdivision, who would have 1 elected member to deal with that 24% over non-compliance as well. And you said that the argument that the Local Government Commission would look at was whether it split a community of interest. Yes. Now, earlier on in the slides, you said that there are 2 factors that the Local Government Commission is looking at, and one is about fair representation and the other is communities of interest. Yes. Given that a non-compliance of that size is more about fair representation than about communities of interest, how do you think that conversation will go? Sorry, I'm asking you to read their minds a little bit, but given that the reason for non-compliance is usually a community of interest, and that's certainly what's the case in North Shore and Albany, here the community of interest is within the boundary, but the numbers are out of whack. So how do we deal with that?
Yes, it's not entirely reading minds. When we did the 2019 review, there was already non-compliance. I can't remember the exact figure. I think it was in the 20-something. And what we put to the Local Government Commission at that time was that it basically didn't make sense to change subdivision boundaries then, but we would look at it when we did this current review. And the Local Government Commission made a comment to that effect that we would do that, and when we started this process reminded us of the need to do that. So I don't think the conversation will go well.
So is it fair to say that the Local Government Commission are expecting us to address a non-compliance, not make it worse?
Correct.
Thank you. And I'd like to speak in debate. Thank you.
Councillor Leone, please.
Oh, kia ora. My question is really about the capacity issues with this. If we're going over, so the average number is around 12,000 per local board member in Tamaki Makaurau, and we're looking at increasing that with this amendment by 10,000. I mean, that's quite a lot. Have we had any other local boards have anything like that or near to that number in the past?
No.
And I just wanted to ask the other question around, I mean, they're only paid for working 20 hours a week, but obviously the workload would increase quite significantly with having an extra 10,000 constituents to have to deal with each. So, I mean, how would that work in terms of their pay?
I mentioned earlier on that there are two key requirements to take into account: effective representation of communities of interest and the fair representation rule. We try and keep discussions about remuneration off the table unless they go to effective representation of communities of interest. There may be scenarios where it's reasonable to talk about remuneration because it will lead to better representation of communities of interest, but I don't think that question falls within community of interest considerations.
Okay, thank you.
It does, to the extent that we do want to make it as viable as possible for people in the community to put themselves forward for local board.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure if that is that the proportion of work and payment and the number of people links very well. Otherwise, the people on the Great Barrier would only be allowed to work 10 minutes because there's one for 200 there. In fact, you've got to be careful to avoid getting onto the council out there. Councillor Stewart, followed by Councillor Philippine.
Well, thank you. Well, as you know, that I'm going to be supporting this change, but I think there is really a time for change. Listening to what the Mayor is quite often discussing out in the community about wanting to look at reducing the number of elected members, and one of the things that I've heard you say, Your Worship, many times, that we have far too many elected members in Auckland, and when you look at the whole of the country, we've actually got probably more elected members looking after the Auckland region than the whole country just about. I think one of the things that I thought we were going to be looking at was, this is just the first tweak, and maybe next year we can have a look at another tweak, maybe looking at the number of elected members that we have right around the Auckland region. I think we need to really start thinking about reducing the numbers, and there's a few reasons, because not only the remuneration, but you get elected members that maybe, and we want to encourage people that have got families and things like that, but there's all sorts of things that are add-ons, like you have the child support, you have the children in daycares and things like that. So there's a whole lot of things, and you've got your technology, and you've got all these sort of things. So I think the public out there really do want to see a bit of change, and they want to see that we're actually trying to reduce some of the costs. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. I'm just been listening to what you had to say, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. We have had a long process going on. Possibly next year when we do look at this, those points should be raised. They'll have the opportunity here. I'll take 2 more questions and there'll be enough. Thanks about this. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Chair. Well, kia ora, Warwick. Good to see you. Warwick, do you know what the view is of the Howick Local Board?
We went to the Howick Local Board with the issue of the non-compliance of the current non-compliance of the Botany subdivision. In our report, we talked about 3 different options, I think. One option was based on changing current boundaries, and there was the option of, we put to the board of increasing the number of members in order to address the compliance. The local board chose that latter option. That's the preference of the local board. It consulted with its local community as to the proposal to have a Flatbush subdivision, and it made, in its formal submission to the Joint Governance Working Party, it supported the current proposal.
Okay, and supplementary, thank you, Chair. If the local board, depending on where this heads around the decision, the local boards do have the ability to appeal the governing body's final decision. If that is the case, which I've read in the report is, what process would that take?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we've treated local boards as submitters, and they would have the ability to appeal or object. The process is that all appeals and objections would be heard by the Local Government Commission. I mentioned the tentative date is the 4th of February next year. So we'd probably meet in this room, and they'd invite the Auckland Council to present its proposal, and all submitters who had asked to would have the opportunity to present their submissions or objections.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, very last one that I'm going to take from the Deputy Mayor. No.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Stewart, Councillor Williamson, if we were to vote for this amendment, can you give me a commitment that you will support your local board and help them with some of their workload?
Absolutely.
You realise you've just committed to make up a cricket team. All right, it has been moved, it's seconded. I'm going to take a vote on...
Division?
No, I've got to have conversation. Now we're going to have a conversation about this, please. But please remember, we have a lot of really important things later in the day, like development contributions. So please wisely use your time. Councillor Sayers has got first rights. This Hills, Henderson, Ferry, Turner. Goodness me. Do you people ever go to Howick? I'm going to send you to Howick and you have to stay there. Come on, Councillor Sayers.
Yeah. Against?
Use it.
Say we're on comments, we're not voting. Does he want to make a comment?
Oh, no comment.
That is a perfect comment. I want your hand up for it. Councillor Hills, can you outdo that?
No. For those who are getting annoyed at this, we have debated this and voted it down already, and then we didn't consult on it. And that's my point. We voted it down, mainly the drop from 9 to 7, which is the opposite way. To your question about Far North District Council, Mayor, they have about 7,000 people per councillor, but they also have a regional council and local boards, which community boards, which means 39 members for the far north. That means each 1,800 people have access to their very own elected member. This would bring it up to 22,000. So the argument across the country, even before the super city, was that locals will be underrepresented. The issue, I think if it was an amendment to 9, maybe that would be not as bad, but to reduce it and not consult on that is quite concerning. And 86% of people who submitted on this in Howick were in favour, and 79% were in favour from the city. So I think we would probably, by the sounds of it, since the local board were unanimously in favour of the 11, it will probably go to review, and that would cost us a whole lot of money to go through that process. And I think this is an unwise way when we talk about changes should be going to referendums and other discussions around this table on Māori wards, that we would do this without consulting the community, opposite to the consultation, opposite to the local board, and completely, dramatically opposite to the rest of the country. So I think this would be a bad move, so I'll be voting against the amendment that we've already voted on in June.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. And I would just like to say I did live in Howick for a year in 2002 when a person of my acquaintance stood against one of the current councillors for the parliamentary seat. And I also worked out there extensively for about 5 years as well with local schools and UCE centres. So, and my in-laws still live there, so I do have some familiarity with the area. And I'd point councillors to the submission from the local board, which was emailed around to all of us, and the chair did ask to speak to this, knowing that this might come up and was declined, and I understand why that was. But my understanding of the Howick local board is they're not minded to generally be wasteful with council money or resources. They are it's a pretty conservative part of the city. And to have them unanimously supporting an increase to 11, knowing that it may well decrease their individual pay as well, I think is significant and something that everyone should definitely take on board. And I'd particularly draw your attention, members, to the little graph that they've got in their submission. I'm trying to find it. Which shows the comparison between current proposed and what they've referred to as alternative, which funnily enough matches the amendment. So the alternative, we've talked a bit about 22,500 people per local board member. Currently they have 17,500. The proposal would bring them down to 14.3 thousand, and the average is actually 11.6. So they're still going to be over the average. We've had Councillor Hill's referred to the far north. I had a little look at Northland while we were talking before, noting that they have 13 councillors and a mayor for 96,000 people. Howick has around 160,000 people. So if we're talking about comparators, the other thing is there's been a few comparators with Parliament. And yes, they have fewer MPs. Those MPs will work full-time. Those MPs will have significant staffing support to do that work and to deal with the constituency queries that they get, which we do not have. Most of us share one, as councillors, share one person with someone else to help with constituency queries. And in local board land, you usually have a team of maybe 3 who support a whole local board. So it's really not a fair comparator. We have 40 people who work full-time in elected member roles across the whole of Auckland Council. That's 19 local board chairs and the 21 of us. So it really isn't a fair comparison with MPs at all. I'd just also like to point out some of the numbers around the submissions here. So we had, I think it was about 1,500 people who addressed the question around Howick. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring that number up. Yes, 1,479 people gave an opinion, well, that includes in 5 organisations, on the proposed changes. Of those, 79% were in support across the city. That's what Member Hill's referred to, 86% locally. We had 5 people by my count, and I did read every single submission, and I did sit through all of the hearings and the deliberations, which I chaired. And what we heard loud and clear was there were 5 people who wrote in that they would like fewer members for this local board. We had far more, hundreds more, say that they supported the 11-member structure. So I think, it's quite frustrating to me to have this debate for a second time, having done all the work that we have done to get to this point, knowing that if we do make a change of this significance at this point, it will likely cost us a lot more money to deal with in appeals and objections and probably get undone. So I am, I kind of feel a little bit like this might be a bit of virtue signalling for someone's community, and I don't appreciate that as a way of not respecting the process that we've all been through. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Oh, and I agree with Greg.
Henderson and Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's quite hard to follow Councillor Sayers' speech. I think that was the best one in this chamber we've ever seen. But I'll give it a crack. Look, voting on this requires an argument that people are overrepresented. I think that is the argument, if I may not misrepresent it. And looking across comparable places, it just doesn't seem accurate to me. It's quite the opposite. Workload's high, increasing. People have a reasonable expectation for their representatives to be available at all times, 24/7, and work for them. I looked up the history of the city and how things were, and I looked at the Waitakere City Council. 150,000 people in Waitakere at amalgamation. They had a mayor, they had 14 councillors, and they had 4 community boards, right? 35 people representing their interests. People look at that as the good old days in my area, where politicians were closer to their community and people felt empowered and like they could make a change themselves. Politicians need to be as close to the community as possible, and when the ratios between elected members and residents get too high, people feel a greater distance from their decision makers and from decision making. This amendment would create that distance, and therefore I cannot go along with it and I won't support it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you there, Mr. Henderson, who is shortly shifting to the Great Barrier so he can get closer to people. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm a 67-year-old West Aucklander, and the reason I got political is I couldn't find any good old days, so I came here and got stuck in. I would point out that over my lifetime, as representation has climbed, voter turnout has plummeted. I don't think it's to do with the number. I think it's to do with the quality. And I stood in a West Auckland marae after the vote on the Maori independent, the Maori ward seats. And I said I did not support that, which I didn't, because we didn't want one more politician. We wanted to get this place working properly first. And so, the community out our way supports the things you've said, Mr. Mayor, in the past about less number of local boards, less number of elected members, and I certainly support empowering those ones who are there to do the job well and properly by giving them procurement closer to where the action's taking place. So I'm not, this is on the opposite side of town to me, but I'm not going to be duplicit in my voting. I support less politicians, and I'll be voting for the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, that's it. Let's vote.
Oh, I must have a right of reply.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Simply,
there's no right of reply on an amendment.
no right of reply.
But apparently there's not. But you do have a right to vote on your amendment, and if
I can speak as a speaker.
Yes.
All I wanted to say was that given this looks like it's going to get carried pretty much unanimously, there's nothing more to add.
okay, rightio. Thank you very much for that there, and I wasn't trying to limit the debate. I was just trying to think about going home at some stage. I'm going to put the motion now.
Division.
All those.
Oh, division has been called.
Who was that?
2 people.
Divided we shall conquer. Right, there's a division between the division callers. Councillor Sandra with an R will now divide us
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, you're voting on the amendment that has been on the screen in red. Councillor Baker.
No.
Councillor Bartley.
No.
Councillor Dalton.
No.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Ferry.
Against.
Councillor Filipaina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Foley.
Against.
Councillor Henderson.
Against.
Councillor Hills.
No, thank you.
Councillor Lee. No. Councillor Leone.
Against.
Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers.
Against.
Deputy Mayor Simpson.
To be frank, I don't know what to do. I'm going to vote for.
Councillor Stewart. Councillor Turner.
For.
Councillor Walker.
For.
Councillor Watson. No. Councillor Williamson. Mayor Brown. That's lost. What have we got? 6 to 15. Yeah. 6:15.
Now I'm going to go to the substantive motion, which we, for those of you who have poor memories, was to support what we initially spoke about. I have been approached by Councillor Lee, who wants to speak on an item he hadn't spoken on before. I'm allowing that, so he will speak on the Waitemata
Yes,
and Gulf.
if this is the right time, Mr Mayor.
Yes, this is your shot.
Okay. First of all, I should declare an interest. I'm the elected member for Waitemata and Gulf. I've been elected to this ward 4 times, I think, since 2010. 3 times with Parnell, Newmarket and Grafton included, and once with those areas excluded. I am concerned about the recommendation in regard to the composition of this ward, and if I could take a little bit of your time, Mr Mayor, I just want to recount what happened at the last review of representation review in regard to this ward. Obviously, the ward was set up by the Local Government Commission in 2010. It was, if you like, included the islands along the same lines as the Auckland Central Parliamentary Ward, which has been this way for, I don't know, 100 years. But it, in terms of the mainland, which is the issue in question here, the ward was balanced to the west and to the east geographically, so that 2/3 of the boundary is actually the Waitemata Harbour. To the west, around the city centre, to the west of the city centre, lies left voting Ponsonby, and to the east, the more right of centre voting Parnell, Newmarket, and so on. And that's the way it was for 3 years. Then we were told at the last representation review that the population had expanded to 19,100 people, and that one councillor representing all those people was under representation and was essentially unfair. Unfair as defined under the Act, the 10% plus or minus rule. There was no real consideration of the communities of interest. And so the Joint Governance Working Party at the time, chaired by Waitemata board member Richard Northey, recommended radical surgery, and the eastern areas of Parnell, Grafton and Newmarket were sliced off, and moved into the Orake ward, so that the Orake ward extended from the Tamaki estuary to Simon Street. And of course, the Waitemata and Gulf ward shrunk. But, very confusingly for the public and most sensible people, the Waitemata local board boundary stayed exactly the same. So you had this confusing, not legible situation of Parnell, Newmarket and Grafton being represented by the Waitemata local board and the Orake ward councillor. What happened after the 2019 election? The Statistics Department released the figures of the 2018 census. And rather than 119,100 people being in the ward, they found it was 865 people were in the ward. So an overestimation by someone, and I'm still not sure where those figures came, of 28%, just about a 1/3 error in numbers. And that's what happened. So to the credit of the staff, they've realised that was a mistake, that separating the boundaries hasn't been fair, hasn't helped voter participation, and is not particularly legible or sensible. So they recommended putting it all back, as the Local Government Commission wanted it. Well, it's not what we've got, and unfortunately, the separation of the ward boundaries, which meant in order to achieve that, what the previous working party recommended meant other ward boundaries and wards were separated, all causing confusion and complications when it comes to the public and when it comes to electors. The other interesting fact about this particular ward, because essentially of the city centre, is that the ratio of electors across the country and across Auckland is between about 68% to 70% of the population. At the time of the original review, what I was able to ascertain was that the ratio of qualified electors in this particular ward was only 51%. And that is because Auckland Central, the city centre, is truly international, with international students and people on short-term working visas, a significant amount of them. Be that as it may, we have the situation now where instead of putting back what the Local Government Commission had carefully arranged, we are putting back about 2,800 people, and including only Grafton. Now, that may be okay, that may be fair enough, but what about democracy? Because it's meant to be about fairness. 68%, back in 2018, 88% of the public said don't separate the ward boundaries. This time around, it's 68% said yes, Auckland Council managers are right to recommend putting the boundaries back. And 8% of submissions said no, we want to stay where we are. And that's fair enough. But when it comes to fairness and democracy, and communities of interest, I get the impression that once again, the public have been ignored and the politicians' considerations have taken a preeminence. And I don't think that is right.
Thank you very much for that. I think I'll have to kill you.
Conclude now, Mr. Mayor. I protest against this. I believe that politicians of whatever political hue deciding who's going to be in the ward and who is not acceptable. It doesn't happen in regard to parliamentary constituencies. What should have happened in Waitemata and Gulf is that the council, realising the enormous bungle and what looked to me very much like a gerrymander, should have said we need an independent panel, or we even asked the Local Government Commission to come in, look at the numbers, repair the damage, and therefore any hint of special interests or rigging would not be a consideration.
Thank you very much for that.
Not look good. It's a bad look, Mr. Mayor, and I think I'm very disappointed that the staff recommendations were not agreed to. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that speech. I'm the only person that is actually independent of this because I represent everywhere and I don't care where the boundaries are, so perhaps I should just make the decision. Councillor Ferry probably won't agree with that.
Right. Hopefully I won't go over time, but I'm sure that you will indulge me if I do, because you just indulged somebody else to do that. So, but I'll try not to. So I would just like to start by acknowledging all the staff, which I said I would do before we got to the final vote on this. So I've got a long list, and I'm hopeful I haven't forgotten anybody, but if I have, that is on me, and I'm sorry. But we've got obviously Warwick, who you've heard from today, Libby, who would have been here with Warwick, but is unfortunately unwell, Carol, Luann, John, Duncan, Maddie, Rose, Louise, Stu, Brenda, Holly, Stephanie, Millie, Brian, who's the magic man with the numbers, Sandra, Shoma, Tristan, Divya, and Michaela is who I've got. Now, you'll be reassured, Mr. Mayor, that nobody there, I think, has been doing this as their sole work. So they're all juggling many balls in the air, as our staff always do. So I want to thank them because I think they've approached this with a great deal of integrity. They've certainly helped us as elected members to work through the intricacies of this, and it has been very intricate. And it's interesting that Councillor Lee raises the issue about Newmarket and Parnell going in and out. While I was an elected member for the previous representation review process 6 years ago, I wasn't part of that process directly. What happened this time was that we had strong submissions from numerous people and organisations in both Newmarket and Parnell seeking to stay in the Ōrākei ward. They felt that the shift from Waitemata and Gulf to Ōrākei was correct and matched their communities of interest. We hear some very compelling presentations from both of the local business associations who pointed to the fact that a lot of the people who come. I didn't interrupt you, Councillor Lee. In fact, you went way over time, so I guess we had that on as well. The business associations pointed out the very strong data about how the people who go to those town centres, which are significant, are predominantly coming from further east, are coming from Ōrākei, which was also a consideration. We had Hapua Thrive present to us about the need to keep the Hobson Bay catchment together as well, which was part of our consideration. So those are just off the top of my head. We had very strong representation there, and so we actually have listened to the community, so I'm a little bit confused. And I would note Joe Malcolm was one of the people who supported the Newmarket and Parnell staying in Ōrākei, I believe, or at least having the same, from the Parnell Community Residents Association. So I'm a little discombobulated, I guess, to hear today, after going through an extensive process, doing the hearings, all of that kind of stuff, that it's not necessarily the right decision. We also had a workshop on this, so yeah, that's, as I say, discombobulating. A few people have noted the fact, and this is one of those areas where the local board boundaries will not match with the ward. And of course that was out of scope for this process. We could not move local board boundaries more than about 2,000 people. And so we did pass some recommendations that note, if you don't mind scrolling down, some future work, and we did specifically call out this particular area about the boundary between Waitemata and Ōrākei needing attention. There we go, local board boundary issues in relation to Ōrākei and Waitemata around Newmarket and Parnell. So hopefully a future process can address that. One of the other things that came up a lot in the discussion was people not feeling like they necessarily knew enough about the difference between local boards and councillors, what the role of subdivisions was. And so we've also recommended there some work before the 2025 election for the council organisation around hopefully increasing the public understanding of those structures, which I would ask people to strongly support. I think we all would benefit from people understanding what we and the local boards do better. So I'll leave it there, and very keen for people to hopefully support this through to the next stage in the process, going to the Local Government Commission for appeals and objections. They will then make a final determination which comes back to us no later than the 11th of April to take effect from the next election. Kia ora.
Thank you. Everyone's lining up. Please, we do want to get onto the development contributions later in the day, which is something of actual importance. Councillor Leone.
I'll make mine very short. So firstly, I want to acknowledge Councillor Ferry and the extensive work she's done navigating through this very important piece of mahi for our city. Tamaki Makaurau is growing, and we need to ensure we're advocating for good representation and boundaries in our beautiful city. Councillor Turner, I just wanted to raise a comment in response to what you mentioned around Māori wards. I know this discussion isn't about Māori wards, but I've got an opportunity to speak. Look, I'm really still saddened about the prehistoric thinking that some of these councillors have regarding Māori representation at this table. And I know we're talking about boundaries, but I just also want to acknowledge going forward, I hope our city does move forward with getting more diversity, and hopefully with additional seats in terms of the Howick Local Board, for example, you'll have 11 seats. We do get further diversity there. The chair has also managed to work through issues regarding the Ōrākei ward, and we took into account the views of the submitters. So once again, it's actually been a really long journey. I'm so aware of that, and good to finally be here. Hopefully we can continue to get more diversity, which reflects our population here in Tamaki Makaurau. Kia ora.
Thank you for that, Councillor Newman.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief. I won't read my speech, but I did want to respond to a couple of points. Actually, Councillor Lee is fundamentally not wrong in relation to the debate in 2019. He's right. And the projections at the time, I thought were heroic. And concerns were expressed at the time by a lot of submitters. They're partially addressed. They weren't fully addressed because Grafton and Parnell and Newmarket were moved into the Ōrākei ward. That, in hindsight, wasn't necessary. And what was recommended this time, or what the initial proposal, was to address that. That hasn't been accepted. A decision was taken. I would have preferred actually to stick with the proposal to ensure the realignment between the local board and the ward boundaries by moving those eastern communities back into the Waitemata and Gulf ward. I know that people get frustrated with Councillor Lee, but he's actually not wrong on that point. And Mike, I'm quite sure that the community, whatever your ward boundaries, you will be re-elected, because I think that you are a well-respected steward in that community. You'll be here longer than some. Finally, Your Worship, can I just say this, that I think that a discussion regarding what are the local board boundaries is interesting, but I think if there is a stress point here, it's probably from the Waitemata local board having a concern about potentially its relationship with those eastern communities, which is okay, but Parnell is the first suburb of Auckland, and I think it has looked west. And I'm deeply sad that we weren't able to address that in the final recommendation. But you know, the numbers weren't there, Mike, and so that's why the Joint Governance Working Party resolved what it did. There will be a further hearings. It will be contested, because I have no doubt there will be submissions against this to the Local Government Commission. But we will have to we will find out what the Local Government Commission says at the conclusion of that. And there will be submitters from the Waitemata ward, I am sure, who will have their say on these matters. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Watson, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I guess the first point I'd make is that
what this process showed, and it has been quite a complex and demanding process that has been given full weight of interrogation. But what it did show is that there are a lot of people around Auckland who do care about where their boundaries are. And contrary to popular belief, whether they're in this local board or this ward, matters to them and matters to them a lot. I found that out very quickly with a couple of matters that came up in respect of my ward. So I would just make the point, as with the last item we voted on, where there was concerns about proper process and giving people the opportunity to comment and to make their views known, that's fundamental. If you don't do that, then you can't really say you've conducted a consultation. And this, I must admit, the one anomaly in this whole process, which has been well run, and from my perspective, is this situation with the Central Auckland ward changes. And I'll say that because we went out with a proposal. The current population estimates now allow for adjustments to these ward boundaries in Central Auckland so that ward and local board boundaries can align again, which is an important consideration, while still ensuring fair representation within the 10% variation rule. And as Councillor Newman said, these changes specifically meant that the communities in Parnell, Newmarket and Grafton, currently in Auraki ward and the Waitemata local board, will go back to the Waitemata and Gulf ward. That's what we went out with, and I heard reference to numbers. Well, when the consultation came back in, there was 68% agreed with that, and only 8% opposed it. So there's the numbers from the submissions from individuals, overwhelming. Interestingly enough, when you break that down, in Auraki, the local board area for Auraki, 68% of the people in Auraki supported that. They supported that too. Yet here we have this, there was reference to the business associations, but I don't think they should be given added weight over the overwhelming majority of the residents, which outweigh them numerically in every other way. Certainly they made their views felt through their pro forma and templated feedback campaign, where most of the people, according to our own notes, indicated that the submitters worked for the local businesses. But should they outweigh the overwhelming view of the local residents? I don't think so. Should they outweigh the view of the Waitemata local board? The board supports the proposed alignment of ward and local board boundaries to ensure for representation as required by the 10% variation rule, etc., etc. So in terms of the public, in terms of the local board, in terms of the councillor, in terms of the specific communities of interest here, they're all saying exactly what Councillor Lee said. Yet we seem to be going entirely off the templated pro formas of a relatively small number of people from the Newmarket Business Association. So Councillor Lee has pointed out an anomaly here. It's contrary to the feedback. We talked about the integrity of the process when Councillor Williamson and Councillor Stewart put up their proposition. What about the integrity of the process here? We've gone out with a proposal. It's been supported overwhelmingly, and what, we're going to now ignore it? That seems to me to be out of kilter with every single other thing that's occurred here. So I won't be supporting this specific proposal because it's not backed up by the feedback from the submitters.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sayers, please.
Thank you, Worship. Look, even though the sample size of feedback in Rodney was very small, there's only a small number of people that participated in the feedback. And for the original proposal, as was pointed out by Warwick, there was over 70, or I think it was 76% of the submitters did not fully support the original proposed boundary changes. However, after listening to the public's feedback for changes and by incorporating those changes, that achieves an over 50% public support. So that's a good reason for me to be supporting the recommendations as a councillor. But perhaps more importantly, I want to support the Rodney Local Board. The Rodney Local Board, as all local boards, have been integral part of this process, much more so than councillors to date, in terms of the decisions they've already had to make. And the Rodney Local Board support has nobody voted against the recommendations up there. 3 abstained, but the rest of the local board, Rodney Local Board, voted in support. So I want to support my local board, so I'll be supporting the recommendations. So I guess in summary, Your Worship, I'll be supporting the recommendations of this modified version, going out for further public consultation and going through the local government commission process. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be quick. Look, I've been thinking about the rural subdivisions. And yeah, look, to be clear, I really do support it and I will be voting for it. The Rodney subdivisions that have the rural focus to them and the way those boundaries have been drawn. But look, I just need to make the point that honestly, it's a disgraceful situation where we can set up rural wards, we can set up rural subdivisions of communities of interest, but we need a referendum for Māori wards, for our treaty partners, for tangata whenua. I'm embarrassed about that. It's a mess not of our own making, but I'm just really ashamed about that, and it's disgraceful. Thank you, Mayor.
Right, we've come to an end of this, and we're now able to put this to a vote. I'll try and put it to a vote normally and say all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary?
Aye.
Okay, it was carried. Thank you for debating.
Can I have my vote for, but note my opposition to the change in the central ward, Waitemata?
Yes, you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. John Watson as well. I'm tempted to join that, but I won't because I shall maintain my glorious independence, even if I did miss out on the noted people from Councillor Ferry of those who helped, having sat through dozens of the bloody things. I won't bother next time. Thanks very much. Right, as a punishment, you're going to have the Chief Executive and Group Financial Chief Officers report